What's up, guys? Clutch Bank 37 here. I haven't made a video in a while, just been caught up with school, midterms, as well as just kind of life. Also didn't really have a whole lot to do videos on, but today we're doing the Armour Command 2 lacrosse head review, so let's dive into it. So if you guys have been following my YouTube channel for a while, you probably know that I like to review things a couple weeks after they come out for a couple of reasons. The major one being I like to really dive into them. I really like to use the product, go past, shoot with it, maybe use it in a couple games or practices if possible. And two, I like to see if other people release videos, that way I can see what they say about it. And then touch on some points they don't really catch, as well as agree or disagree with things. But I believe this is the only review of the Command 2, or at least the only one that I've seen on YouTube. By the time this is uploaded, there could be a couple more. But anyway, huge shout out to Under Armour. They sent me over 2 Command 2s to check out, one for myself and one to kind of die and put through the ringer and eventually give it away or some sort. So that'll be coming later on. But basically, now we're going to dive into the actual review of the Command 2, and it might surprise you, this might be the head that brings you back to Under Armour. So starting off this review, we're going to go over aesthetics and then pros, cons, what I like, dislike, and what really makes this head stand out above the original Command. Aesthetic-wise, they kept it almost the exact same when it comes to sidewall strut design. They have the 2 struts down here and 1 strut up here, which I really like. Didn't change it, didn't thin it down or thicken it up, kept it almost identical. From there, like I said in the scoop, you have a nice flat scoop. It has the glide scoop from Under Armour, which has become one of my favorites. Not as good as the Mark II scoops, but definitely up there. From there, the major 4 holes you do the top string in, they are recessed in the back, so it really holds the strings in, and it also protects them very well. If you're going to scoop a ground ball, there's no chance that your strings are going to rub against the ground, which I think is awesome. Aesthetic-wise, at the front, the 2 most outer ones are very dug in here in the front. I think that's just to cut down on weight. They don't do anything for string-wise. They don't do anything for performance necessarily. It's just kind of a nice cutout, just to make it look a little different. And then from there, they did have some issues with the top string right here cutting or getting stuck, and then they also do have these pretty close. So what they did with the Command 2 was they did a little raised bar here to help protect it even more and kind of help get away from the lip aspect of playing with it, which I never had an issue with, but I guess some people did. From there, aesthetic-wise, just a whole lot of the same stuff, just a little bit of extra addedness to it, I guess you could say. There's a lot of texture going down the head pretty much throughout the whole head. From all the front, it has this little hexagonal texture pattern, kind of like a snakeskin. Obviously, the new Under Armour jewel here in the front, it's a little smaller than the Command low, which I'm a huge fan of. Not too bright, but still stands out a little bit. And from there, that's basically all they changed when it comes to aesthetics. Like I said, the scoop is a little different. The scoop does add a little bit of difference from the original Command, but it doesn't do anything performance-wise necessarily. Like I said, never had an issue with the ball hitting the top of the scoop or my string ripping, but apparently some people had. So just made a little raised scoop here. From there, that's pretty much it. They changed aesthetic-wise. Looks nice and clean, although here on the sidewalls, if you do die heads, it's a bit of an issue. It has kind of a raised texture that drops down here and then comes back up raised. Not a huge problem, but still just a little thing. Makes it look a lot better. The old Command was a little chunky and beefy and almost looked real thick, but this one kind of slimmed down and just looks a little better. Sidewall struts, like I said, kept them the exact same, and the face shape, which I have fallen in love with, they didn't change at all. So if you like the original Command, you just wanted a lighter head, you wanted something a bit more futuristic or better looking, Command 2 might be for you. So now we're going to dive into the pros and then cons and then finish up the review. So we'll start off with the cons of the Command 2 just because the pros, there's really a lot to cover and I don't want to go big chunk of video, small chunk of video. So the cons, there's a lot of texture to the head which I don't think is necessarily important or does anything good. Obviously, most heads nowadays have some type of texture to them to make them look a bit futuristic, make them look a little nicer, but the Command 2 is just a little overboard. I mean, from here to here, it's just textured. Nothing on the back is textured, but all of the sidewall rails, all the parts underneath the sidewall rails have this little snakeskin texture. From there, the scoop does as well, and then this middle portion does have a bit of a texture to it right in the middle of the scoop. So not a huge fan of that. It doesn't affect the playability of it. However, when you go to dye it, you do have to be careful because if you don't use enough heat or the right vinyl, those textures will cause some bleeding, but I didn't have hardly any troubles with this one. From there, nothing really bad to say. However, if you look at the Command 2 online, most websites or retailers that have them, if you look at the sidewall or the side picture of it, you notice that the holes, the first, 1, 2, 3, Really the first 2 holes, the 4th hole, the 6th hole, and then the 8th hole going down are smaller. And this one right here, this one, and this one are larger, and they're noticeably larger. When I first saw that, it threw me off, and I was thinking maybe it's because nowadays people are getting real technical with their stringing. They want to lock down the first 2 or 3 very tightly, maybe double knot it, but it really threw me off. But after talking to Under Armour, they actually turned out into a pro, and you'll understand after you watch the video and look at the pro section. So con-wise, not a whole lot. Aesthetic-wise, you know, they just changed a bit of the grip to it, a bit of texture to it, which I don't really agree with, but makes it look a little nicer, makes it look cooler. And then from there, these 2 outer divots have no performance issues or performance enhancements whatsoever. They're just kind of for looks and to shave off some weight. Otherwise, there really aren't a whole lot of cons to it. The plastic they use is a little different than the original Command. It's lighter, but when you go to dye it, it does take a bit longer because the plastic is some sort of combination of different stuff, which I don't need to dive into because it doesn't really affect the head. So now we're going to dive into the pros, talk to you about the head, and why it's probably one of my favorite heads of this year, and it's only March. Diving into the pros of Command 2, the biggest one is the weight. The original Command was about 5.2 ounces, and the Command 2 is 4.7 ounces. Almost a whole oh my gosh, almost a full half-ounce lighter, which is a huge deal. My only gripe with the original Command was it was too beefy, too bulky, and too heavy. However, I did love it, but I think if they'd shaved some weight off, it would have been a bit of a better head. And they answered those questions with the Command 2, and they made it a lot lighter. When you go and make a head lighter, you know, you make a 2.0 version or a pro version of a head, usually to shave off some weight, they do some crazy cutouts. And most of the time, they actually will thin out these sidewall rails just a bit to make it seem a bit lighter and a bit more streamlined, or a bit more pro looking. But the Command 2, they didn't even touch these struts at all. There's some texture to the struts that was added, but it doesn't affect the weight whatsoever, and it actually is pretty much the original Command, just lighter, which I think is a huge pro. From there, they kept the glide scoop, obviously. The recessed top holes to protect your top string. Obviously, they wouldn't change that because it's a huge selling point of the Command. And from there, this little middle this middle bar and middle portion could be a pro, could be a con. I just don't think it's big enough to actually affect playing-wise. You know, stringing-wise and dyeing-wise, it can cause a couple of problems, but really not a whole lot. So from there, actually playing on that little bar that's raised here, is the scoop itself is thinned out just a little bit. The original Command had a fairly thick scoop, but the Command 2 is fairly thinned out, and I think where this bar is actually shows ideally how much plastic they shaved off. I think it was just kind of a thing to show, hey, we took out a bunch of thickness in the scoop, especially here in the middle portion, so here's how much we took out. So this part here is actually kind of triangular that goes into here, so the middle portion of the scoop is a lot thinner than the outer portion, which is great for ground balls. If you're attacking a ball straight on, having a thinner scoop is going to help it to go in a little faster. Having the glide scoop complements that, so you come at an angle and it pushes it in the middle. Naturally, the ball will go in the scoop a little faster. So the scoop itself, still just about as thick on the outsides, but from probably about here in the middle portion of the scoop, it is nice and thin, which is perfect. From there, stringability, could be a pro, could be a con. They did change these sidewall holes a little bit. They used to be more circular, but now if you can see like this one right here, it's more square. Doesn't really affect me. I don't really see a huge issue with it. However, if you're someone who likes to put 2 sidewall holes through some of these, you can't do that with this square because they're just a little too small for 2 sidewall holes. Me personally, I think that the reason I did the squares was to add a bit of stiffness to it, so if you take face-offs, I don't know why you wouldn't use a Command X. But if you take face-offs with this or you're worried about it pinching, the squares will naturally help keep it a little stiffer down below. From there, they kept almost the same thickness of the sidewall rails. They are thinned down very slightly, but they kept them nice and thick, so a defensive player, an LSM, could definitely use this and still lay the hammer because it is nice and sturdy. From there, being half an ounce lighter, typically you'd think that the head would be a bit more flexible, but the Command 2 is actually almost a little stiffer than the original Command. Me personally, I think it's about the same, but some people say it's a little stiffer, but as you can see here, even dyed, it's fairly stiff. So that's definitely a huge pro. Kept it pretty much the same, just changed some aesthetically stuff and then made it just a little better. In my opinion, the original Command was one of the best heads, at least of its time, and now the Command 2 just makes it even better. One thing I really want to touch on that I don't think a lot of people understand or know is the actual sidewall holes up here in the top portion of the head. So when talking about the sidewall holes, typically nowadays most lacrosse companies and manufacturers are putting the first 4 or even 5 holes a lot larger than the rest, just because of top strings and tie-ons, and they answered some stringers' prayers with the hole making them larger so people can do a double triangle top string or do 3 or 4 loops, whatever it is. When you look at the Command 2, the first 2 holes are small. They're about the same size as the standard sidewall hole, which isn't good for top strings. Obviously nowadays most people are double wrapping them, and seeing those first 2 being really small, I was worried they go back to their old days where the heads had the very, very small holes, but luckily if you don't use hero strings you can still get 2 strings through them fairly easily. From there I noticed the 3rd, 5th, and 7th hole were larger. My first thought was maybe that's some stringing technique that they'll show or make a video on where you tie on the top string through the 3rd hole and then you start on the 5th hole to create the nice channel and pull down. But after looking through it a bit more and talking to an Under Armour rep, I was actually able to figure out what it was, and it kind of blew me away. So like I said earlier, a bunch of companies do the first 3 or 4 holes very large, even the 5th hole, that way you can get a bunch of sidewall strings through. But Under Armour took it a different route. As a con, I think the first 2 should have been larger, but you can still fit 2 holes. But the main purpose of these holes right here is actually for the shooting strings. So they saw an issue with shooting strings in the field and box game where people are playing and they just wrap them around the plastic like most people do nowadays. But that caused some issues, some very kind of unconventional issues, which is if you're playing or scooping ground balls or you're defending, you're making checks, if it's wrapped around the plastic, if that string gets snagged or pulled a little bit, it'll affect how you shoot and play. From there, they also didn't like it because it did become a little loose or tight. Sometimes you had to go through and readjust them. I know I have a couple times with some of my sticks, but it wasn't a huge problem. Just a nice little tighten or loosen and it's good to go. So what they decided to do was string up a bunch of prototype pockets in the Command 2 prototypes and find out where the average shooting strings go, which is it's for the 4-inch rule, of course, which is this row of holes, this row, and this row, which are the 10 diamond rows. That way you can get 3 straight or any kind of setup going here in this top block. And what they want to do is create something where the average shooting string or average person did a nylon and a straight, a nylon and 2 straights, or 3 straight. And they want to make it a little easier. So they widen these holes for the shooting strings to go through, which after finding out I think is something that's super genius and something not a lot of people would have thought about. Me personally, if I was ever to create a head, that's probably one of the last things I would think about. But it's a cool little tidbit, cool little touch that I think makes the Command 2 just a little cooler than most heads. However, I wish they would have done a 4th one down here because sometimes depending on how you string it, you can definitely have a shooting string 1 row lower. Just depends on your sidewalls, and me playing a lot of box, I prefer 4 straight. So having a 4th hole right here where the shooting strings can go through would have made it a little better, but not a big issue. So that is why I left that out of pros and cons, because it's up to you guys to decide. Do you think that having these 3 large holes makes it better, worse? Does it not affect you? Me personally, doesn't affect me a whole lot. Never had any issues with wrapping the shooting string around the plastic itself, but I think it's a cool little tidbit. Makes it stand out a bit more, makes it more streamlined, makes it more, ideally just flow better. You know, nothing's worse than having a sweet custom dyed head and having the strings wrapped around and covering up some parts or any issues with stringing patterns, whatever it may be. So having those extra holes where you can put the shooting strings through is really cool. On top of that, if you do end up stringing through these larger holes with a knotted SI or knot or whatever you may do, a normal shooting string will still fit through those perfectly. So kudos to Armour for that. Nice little touch I don't think anyone would have caught it. And lastly, I think it's really cool. I think it makes the Command 2 stand out just that much more of the original Command. And now that you guys know that about the Command 2 and you pick one up, try it out. Let me know what you guys think about that. I think it's a pretty cool little tidbit that I would have not seen coming, or I probably wouldn't have known if they had not told me. So the last thing I'm going to say about the Command 2 before finishing the review is I wish they would have had 2 little screw holes down here. Most companies and most heads nowadays do have 2. They only have 1, which doesn't cause a lot of problems if you have a power drill, but I just think that nowadays they're a little behind when it comes to the throat of the head. The throat itself is pretty good. It's still a little beefy, a little thick, which I'm okay with, don't have any issues with, but 2 screw holes would have been nice. From there, I think the Command 2 is a great head. I think this is going to be one of the better selling heads because the original Command was used by most Under Armour athletes, most NCAA schools who were sponsored by Under Armour. A lot of people went the Command because it was a lot better than the previous heads, and it was just a really good offering. It's great for any position still. It's nice and pinched, so it's good for attack and middies. It's still wide and still very thick and durable, so good for defenders and LSM. And the string ability of it, nowadays, most people can string any pocket, any head, but naturally the string ability of it creates a nice mid pocket, so it's really just good for anyone who likes a standard mid pocket. From there, they kept pretty much the face shape the exact same, the sidewall stretch the same, just added some small touches and shaved off about ½ an ounce, which is huge in the lacrosse world and huge with lacrosse heads nowadays. So me personally, I think the Command 2 is going to be one of the best sellers this year, and it honestly might be the head that brings me back to using Under Armour stuff pretty much religiously. I love the original Command, just had some problems with the weight and the scoop, but they changed all that and made it just a little bit better. Having this little hidden feature here with the shooting strings makes it a little cooler, a little streamlined, makes it look a little better personally. You still get the shooting strings wrapped around the plastic, they're just not wrapped around the thick part. Scoop wise, one of the best scoops in lacrosse. I'd put it right next to the Mark II series. And overall, I think Under Armour is definitely going to make a huge splash in the lacrosse world coming. That sounded weird. I think they'll make a huge splash in the lacrosse world in the next year or two. We'll go with that. If you're going to pick one up. And if you think the little changes are enough to make it a top-selling head yet again. When the original Command came out, it was at the top of the list, and then it slowly died down just because people started to see how thick it was and how heavy it was. But I think the Command 2 is a huge step up, and I think it's the same head, just better. So before we go, a couple things. This Command 2 is struck up with a custom LE quencher mesh from Throne of String. It's their Fiber 2, dyed with a like mic theme. So you got the green to orange fade. Try to match the green with the green here, and it came out pretty close. Cool little tidbits up here. They got the XXIII for 23 for Jordan, the Jumpman logos, and then a nice little elephant print down here. 23, some cool stuff here. This has actually up for grabs as well as all the other stuff, the bottle and the towel and the quencher pack on the website. Only what I'm going to do. It took a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a very limited edition piece of mesh. So if you were interested in this, it is up for grabs. Go hit the link in my bio to check it out. From there, I do have a couple other custom dyed heads. I have a custom Johns Hopkins Under Armour Command 2 with Hero 2.0. Ideally the same pocket, just a different dye. From there, I did 4 more college heads, which I think will be big sellers. A lot of top teams nowadays. You got a DU ECD Rebel offense. Got a Notre Dame themed ECD Rebel offense as well. A UNC Nike Lakota 2, just to kind of match that UNC uses the Lakota 2, especially Chris Cloutier, who everyone has a little boy crush on. And then lastly, the University of Albany Maverick Kinetic. So those are all up for grabs. By the time you guys see this video, they may be gone, but hit the link. Oh my gosh. Hit the link in the bio, iconiclax.com. Pick up some apparel, pick up a custom dyed or strung head. Help your boy out, help you guys out, get something sick. Let me know what you guys think about the Command 2. I really love it. If I had another one or two, I would dye one up for myself, but just gotta wait for that. More videos coming. Now that school is kind of starting to die down and spring break is just around the corner, so be doing some more fun videos for you guys, more reviews. Let me know down below, yet again, what you think about the Command 2, and what you guys want to see next. Maybe a shooting video, shooting demo, who knows. Thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate you all more than you know. You guys make my life a lot easier than it needs to be, so you guys are the best.